Welcome everyone to the Terraform on Azure community call. This is our first one of 2025, another year. It's crazy that we've been doing this for what, maybe 3 years now almost. So it has been great to see the increase in attendance and the increase in the community. We've surpassed the 1500 mark pretty recently, and that was really cool. For the first timers and anyone else, for a reminder, just remember, let's be nice and not be mean. And again, these have shifted over the months or the years. They used to be much more planned out by myself and Mark Gray, but now we have shifted and tried to keep things a little more open forum, but make sure that everything is on a monthly recurring consistent series. So that has been a really great process, and it's been awesome to have that opportunity. But there's a lot of cool features that are going on here, and we'll talk about them today. So a quick overview of Azure deployments. So first, we want to highlight the importance of Terraform in Azure, and we want to make sure that everyone is aware that we are very committed to improving that experience. So we are definitely trying to put together a lot of effort across our teams for that. And that includes making sure that Azure is the platform of choice for IT, DevOps, developers. Our team is actually a combination of Bicep, ARM templates, and Terraform. So we own all of the infrastructure as code spaces. And of course, we have the community, which is really a great place for people to sort of just learn, to connect, to grow, to give feedback, and also to just share some of the different things that they do. So we want you to be up to date to what we're up to. We want you to make sure that you're aligned with our team in terms of all of the different efforts that we're making. And we really want to make sure that you feel connected to all of the different efforts that are going on in this space. Here's the list of all of our current stuff. The blog post is the one thing that we've been slacking on. No pun intended about Slack either, but make sure you fill out those first two links. So make sure you're in the email list so that whenever we send out some community updates, those will get into your inbox. And then also make sure to join the Slack. And the Slack, again, is where we share a lot of updates, including the whole release of things like the export tool and other functionality. And as always, we're still figuring out how we want to do presenters, but we welcome your presentation ideas, and we're thinking of how to reach out, and we will be reaching out in the coming weeks to invite some people to hopefully come in and contribute to these conversations. So yes, and also follow us on YouTube and Twitter. And that about does it for the stuff that I always talk about. This is a slide that at this point I'm just running through for the new folks each week. And then I didn't have anything too crazy today, but I did have one thing that I thought was pretty cool. Does anyone know what a TUI is?
A textual UI?
So I didn't know either until one of my engineers showed me this the other day. And unfortunately, there we go. Textual user interface. I believe Dustin has the right thing here. So I'm going to share my screen, and I want to just demo a project. This is not Terraforming Under the Influence is a great guess. I'm not going to say it's the right one, but there's a tool that one of our engineers has worked on, and I think it's really cool. It's a TUI for Terraform. So what is a TUI? The simplest way to look at it is just, you can watch the demo that he has here, where he does a Terraform apply, and he uses this tool called Pipeform. And this is a generic tool that doesn't, it's provider agnostic. So obviously here he's using a bunch of null resources, but you can use this with Azure, of course, which all of you should be doing. So the nice thing about this tool is that you can see the actual runtimes that are kind of taking place as you're running your Terraform code. I know a lot of people just have not had a great way to sort of see this sort of insight before. You can actually not only create, or sorry, track your applies and see how long things take to complete, but you can also see um, the actual timestamps in terms of when operations start and when operations end. And I would highly recommend everyone check it out if you're into that. The the timestamp thing is here. Here's a sample CSV. I try to get the demo working, but as always, the demo gods evade me again. So this is a cool little tool. Highly recommend you try it out if you are looking for something that will kind of give you more granular information as you're running your plans and you're running your applies. And it does work on both of those, by the way. It works on plan and apply. So cool little tool. Just a little open source project of the month, if you will, from my end. Any questions about this?
I wonder if that could be
Can we integrate that with some kind of CI/CD like GitHub Actions, or it is and just an interactive thing only to provide the report or to export the reports of the time?
So I think what you can do is, and I'm not sure exactly, but great to see you, Kevin. My initial thought is if you have the CSV, you could potentially format the output of the CSV into your output of your pipeline. So after your pipeline finishes running, it'll say, hey, here is the total time that each of the components took. And if you can just convert that into some sort of readable format, I think that actually can integrate quite well.
Yeah, I
I
was
think
going to
someone
say the
else is
same
talking.
thing.
Go ahead,
Yeah,
Jeremy.
that's Jeremy. Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. How do we pull it into a CI/CD so that that's probably one of my biggest complaints for newbies is in our ASDO pipeline, it just runs and runs and runs and runs. And I mean, we're deploying 30 or 40 resources at a time, and it's really hard. I don't really want to go through the plan, but I want to look at the plan and say, hey, I believe I should have 30 resources. Can I get boil up a list of, hey, here's the 30 resources it's going to create, just single line items for each one, so that I don't need to step through the plan file itself to see the hundreds of lines that are in there. So this would be
Totally.
kind of interesting to go along with that.
Yeah, that's good feedback that I can pass along too. Also, thank you to Dimitri for dropping the other one, all in favor of just continuing to evangelize whatever is good. So, all right. That was my little tool. And like I said before, we try to keep this relatively open forum on certain weeks. Or certain months, sorry. This is one of those months. So the floor is sort of open for everyone. If you have an interesting demo of something that you've been doing, if you have something that you feel like you've been stuck on and you have questions about it, I think this is an open space. And I have a couple things that I can use to fill the time, of course, if no one has anything, but want to prioritize you and your thoughts on top of mind. So, any brave volunteers? Nicholas is like, you cannot get me to talk.
Looks like silence is golden, Stephen.
Yes, exactly. Usually it's this 1 minute of silence and then someone comes off mute and talks about something brilliant and blows my mind. So I'll bear with
I
it
don't
for
know
a
about
little.
brilliant. I don't know about brilliant, but I have kind of it's been an ongoing issue, and isn't really like this may be an issue with Azure RM, not necessarily anything that you guys directly work on, but it's when it comes to resource dependencies, one thing that I've run into is that the even if your only dependency on a resource is the resource ID, it will cause Terraform will defer updates to that resource or defer like data calls from that resource into the apply phase instead of doing them in the plan phase because it thinks the dependent resource may have a change, even if the resource ID is your only dependency and is obviously never going to actually change unless it's destroyed and recreated. Which causes some like kind of annoying issues in like unnecessary, unnecessary changes being identified in plan and applies because Terraform says that it doesn't know what the value is going to be until after the apply when it's obvious to anyone that understands what's happening that it's a value that's never going to change, which is kind of something that we run into on my team occasionally and gets frustrating sometimes. And I was just wondering if anyone here had any insight on that behavior.
So Caleb, help me understand here. Is it mainly just the annoyance of the clutter of the plan phase, just filled with a bunch of known after applies, or?
Yeah. So, and I guess so. A real example that we're running into that I'm looking at right now is that I have an AZ API call that is intended to look up the app settings of a web app during the plan, and I want it to happen during the plan phase. If the web app is already deployed, there should be no reason why it can't. And obviously, and one of the inputs is the resource ID of the web app itself, and the web app was deployed with Azure RM. What happens is that if there's a plan or if there's a change to a setting on the web app, that data call with AZ API gets deferred to the apply phase to refresh. Like the refresh of that data call gets deferred to the apply phase. And then I have other dependent resources that depend on that data call that are getting applied or that are also showing up in the plan when they shouldn't need to, because nothing in that chain is actually changing. So, and then it becomes an issue when I have teams that have 15 to 20 web apps in their environment, and every single one of them is showing this chain of changes in the plan, even though the values are not actually being changed.
I want to open it up to the floor here. Make sure I'm not the only one talking with Caleb. Anyone have thoughts there? Or has anyone else run into something similar?
Definitely have run into something similar. It's been an issue when we have people who are looking at infrastructure changes and may or may not have that level of understanding of what Terraform plan is talking about. So it causes confusion. And it's been a topic that we've had to have on calls where we're like, guys, it's not something to worry about, but it shows up.
And even if you can convince them that it's not something to worry about, if you've got a bunch of resources in an environment, it gets really noisy really fast. And even if you know what to look for, there's still a bunch of shit you have to scroll through. Sorry.
No, I get it. I get the frustration. I've been there, lived it.
So would it be helpful if there was are you almost looking to just, I'm thinking a bit implementation wise, do you want a lock on that property where we say, hey, on the create, maybe you're going to know what this is. And then after that, this isn't going to change. So please just keep.
I mean, that might be helpful. That would be a workaround. I think the underlying cause is in Azure RM. And I don't know that that's fruitful to try to push too hard on that team for an issue like this. Because what seems to be happening, as I understand it, is that the dependent resource, like the web app, or the the original dependency, that if it gets updated, Azure RM wants, or Terraform wants to refresh everything that is dependent on that resource. But the issue for me is that there's a handful of attributes, the resource ID being the primary one, that are never going to actually change. It doesn't actually matter if any other change, if it's not getting destroyed, that resource ID is never going to change. It's immutable once the resource is created. So I think the issue is in Azure RM. Like if someone was gonna fix it for real, it would have to be that team, and it would be something like those values being immutable and not needing to be refreshed if that's the only thing that you're depending on. My workaround right now is to use the local data. I'll use the data external provider to run a script and return, and just do that out of band in Bash, like checking to see if my values have changed or not.
Is this possibly a scenario where your output, it thinks the output is being recreated every time? Like, is it an individual output, or is it a map or an object output in the Azure RM?
It is the resource ID string. That is, and like that's it. That's the only output that I'm using. At least for this chain of dependencies. Other parts of the module use different outputs, but they behave as expected.
I think it's meaningful feedback and something that we should definitely
Yeah,
be.
I wasn't expecting like a solution or anything like that. Like I just wanted to see if mention it at least.
Nope. Solution will
to
be
the elders.
released tomorrow, and it'll work perfectly. It'll be a Terraform core thing too. We just overlord our way into Terraform core. Just kidding. All right, I'm working my way through the chat. Sounds like we've managed to make a connection on figuring out some issues with PIM assignments, so I'm going to skip over that issue for now. I'm sorry to hear about the joys of trying to do user provisioning. And looks like we have App Gateway. And I made a joke in the chat that as far as I'm concerned, App Gateway never has any issues as long as I don't look at it. Because yes, this resource always seems to pop up with some new fit. Jeffrey, when you say that it's trying to reorder the list, you're saying the hash is just unordered and Terraform kind of throws a fit because of that, because it thinks it's a change?
Yeah, so we have a lot of route paths set up in App Gateway. So whenever we go to add or remove one, instead of just seeing that one particular path is removed, it looks like it just tries to reorder things. So you end up with, it's one giant resource, but inside that list of all your route paths, you'll see, I don't know, 2 dozen changes, and somebody that's looking at that and trying to approve a PR, like when you're simply just adding a path, they go in panic mode because they're unsure of like what's actually changing, because they've got to look and see, okay, this path is being changed, and then this one's being added at a lower stage, and they just kind of cascading keep changing. So it makes the plans very messy. And actually, we have a challenge even after those changes happen, keeping the plan green. Because like we do like drift detection and try to make sure that, for however many app gateways we have, that they're all green all the time, so that in an emergency or whatever, somebody knows what's out there is actually as is. And that's been a challenge.
How do you deploy each of those?
Second, that we've seen much the same behavior. And I was about to ask a similar question. So,
Is it like through a for each or a for I and index, or how do you do this?
Let me just double check. I believe we're just inputting a map of the items,
Yeah.
but I could just double check that.
Yeah, so you're just doing it for each something.
We had some more complex logic that we were doing some of these things, but we tried to simplify the module as much as possible to avoid some of those things, to just get back to basically what the provider was doing, to see if that would solve it. But I can provide that back shortly. But yeah, besides that, there's other things with App Gateway that frustrate me, but I don't think those are Terraform related. The number of routes you can have is 100. I think they increased it on the
Kingdom
App Gateway for
for an
containers.
App Gateway v3.
V3?
I said my kingdom for them to release an App Gateway
Oh.
v3 because v2 is, there are many bizarre design decisions that are fun to work around.
Yeah, the App Gateway for containers, they just recently upgraded the resource limits, but the traditional App Gateway still has that 100 limit, which from a microservices perspective is something that we've hit limits on.
Here's
Antonino
you might-
has their hand up.
Yeah, I didn't
You
want
might-
to just like jump in, but to jump on the application gateway bandwagon, a frustration that I have with it is being able to add things, resources like backends, listeners without having to rebuild the whole thing. I don't know if anybody has ran into this, or am I just doing it wrong?
As
Yeah.
far as for that,
Same problem.
I've done some testing on that around. Obviously, the plan looks really ridiculously noisy, but when you actually look at what's happening to the resource, it does look like it is only changing the things that it needs to. So it seems like it is just the ordering of whether it's the rules, whether it's the probes, whether it's the listeners, whatever.
Yeah.
Every time it comes back as a different
Yeah.
order, and you do sit there forever going, is everything still there? Am I missing something? We're looking at actually separating out some of our app gateways to try and make it easier for our engineers to unpick. And I do remember reading somewhere about someone professing that using dynamic blocks with maps so that you're actually using keys rather than indexes for it was a possible way of helping, but I haven't actually tried that yet. Has anyone tried that way and still hitting the same problem to save me some time?
I'm just
I've not
checking our
tried
code, but I
that.
think that's what we have. Yeah, but we have it as a map with a dynamic.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I have that configuration as well. The dynamics for each over map, and that doesn't seem to be an issue. But the problem with the recreating anytime we make a change to a route, we still experience that. So it like tears down and rebuilds that.
Is
every
it
time.
tearing down, rebuilding the entire application gateway?
No, just the subsetting. So like if I add a route, it'll tear down all of those routes and then rebuild them in a new order.
Yeah.
Like it'll show that it's destroying the routes.
I think it shows that it's destroying.
It's not really
Yeah, it's not actually doing it. When you look at actually look at the activity log as to what it's actually doing, it is just doing the one or two things that you've added. But yeah, that plan is just going, no, I'm getting rid of everything and I'm going to rebuild everything, which is terrifying to our engineers, our InfoSec guys in particular. They look at it and go, Christ, we're not wading through that. And it means that any kind of PRs on it, when it can be something really simple, it'll take a day for them to actually go through and unpick it all. It's an absolute nightmare.
Yeah, I put a note in the chat that's straight out of the documentation for that resource.
Yeah, that's actually something I was going to mention too, because that behavior was changed in Azure M3, like the set versus list thing. So that's probably what we're all seeing.
We've found that with several of the providers with Azure Terraform, where it's like, oh, you make this simple change and it's going to create all this rebuild. And so we've actually, in a couple of places, substituted using AZ API. So we let the provider create the original resource, but then we have it ignore changes and use AZ API, because like I forget there's something where it actually destroys and recreates the resource, but Azure doesn't require that. So we've seen that across several of the resource types.
We use that pattern fairly regularly as well, for the same reason. There's a number of resources where if you do something like a SKU change, or like zone availability changes, which are destructive with Azure RM, but not in the portal and not with AZ API.
Yeah, so we're having a more and more deep discussion based upon what Stephen has brought up in other calls about basically, are we going to abandon using Azure RM except for the simplest things and maybe just start using AZ API? Because we struggle with some of the decisions made, and then the slow updates for changes. And this is just an example. Like rather than doing Azure RM and having AZ API, then do some additional massaging, why don't we just use AZ API? So we're having a lot of internal discussions for our modules for that.
It's a good conversation to have. I think definitely a lot of things between the providers are still a little bit messy, and we've seen interesting situations going on there. So definitely app gateway is always there. And for those who haven't heard of AZ API or haven't used it, definitely recommend trying it out. That provider will try to be as unopinionated as possible from the API. That does mean that you can shoot yourself in the foot if you don't understand how the API works, but it also means that you're not going to get inconsistent behaviors. So appreciate everybody chipping in. I feel like people were very excited about App Gateway. There's a real pain
It's
there.
a group therapy session for us all.
It's the phrase they use nowadays is trauma bonding. So
yes, definitely. Yeah, App Gateway is great, but I think they overcomplicated the design of the API, which then makes for a lot of the problems that people are seeing.
Totally. All right. I do want to keep moving. So I'm going to combine two of these. There is a recent update about flexible federated identity credentials, which is an Entra ID thing. And of course, there was someone in the chat talking about the Azure AD provider just not getting a lot of updates. So the thing I want to figure out, and I can't say anything yet, but the thing I want to figure out with all of you is, what do you need from Entra/Graph right now? Because I think we are in the middle of trying to figure out how we can sort of revamp our support for the whole Entra and Graph space. But we're also trying to figure out what sort of areas we should drill into to really make sure that the support there is robust. In an ideal world, we can cover everything and we have bandwidth for everything. But definitely, we want to try to create something that is able to sort of keep up. And to the point of Adam, who just dropped this in the chat, it would be great if we had like an AZ API like provider. The real question there is, yeah, like what is important or what is required for you? Because there's a big scope in this whole land of Graph and Entra, and is everything necessary? What are basically, I guess, where people are really like, man, I wish I had that in Terraform.
App registrations.
Yeah. So
unless I've missed something, you have to create a bunch of JSON and then push JSON. And it would be great if you actually had a more object oriented access to handle your app registrations.
Have you seen they redid some of the app registration resources in Azure AD this summer? If you haven't looked at it since then,
And so
it'd be
perhaps
worth
I
double
haven't looked
checking.
at that, and I got to look at that then.
But yeah, for us, app registrations, SPNs, which are connected, and group membership and groups, like those all together, like we do a lot of that stuff with Terraform right now.
We also find a lot that the plan will tell us that it has to recreate an RBAC because the ID changed when the ID hasn't actually changed. And then when it actually goes, you know, so the plan goes, oh yeah, we're going to change stuff. Change anything. And you're like, well, why do you keep telling me? So like, there's some weirdness with how it's detecting some of those, the IDs of objects in AD.
Let me get creative with this. Hold on. I just thought of this idea in the moment. So I'm seeing people engaging a lot on the chat. I'm seeing people kind of coming and talking. I am wondering if I can just make things easier. So app registrations, PIM, conditional access, service principal, all that good stuff. Role names, SKUs, a lot of things here that are. I think the big thing for us is, yeah, we know this is a pain point. We want to make sure it works, but we also want to figure out what it is that are sort of required from your side. So. Every monster in Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate before Monster Hunter Wilds arrives. Last episode was Terraform refresh state of groups. I apologize. I'm trying to keep up with all the chat, and some of this is flying over my head. So if I miss your message, please don't take it personally. Do you mind explaining that issue that you ran into, Suryendu? Just because I can't seem to get my computer to cooperate with me.
So if you if you try to create an Azure AD group resource, and if you specify that prevent duplicate names equal to true, at the time of refreshing the state, sometime you will get an error that Terraform cannot read that particular group. So it happens quite a lot, and this having preventing creation of duplicate group is quite sometimes is very necessary. But if we put this particular parameter, it often breaks. So yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's not great. Role names, SKUids. All right, help me out here. So has anyone done a word cloud?
Yeah, there's some online tools for it, but I didn't
Yeah.
find that any of them were very easy to use. You needed to upload like a Word doc of all the words that you wanted. You couldn't just start punching words and hitting enter and
Yeah.
plugging them in. It was a little more.
So I'm gonna try this with you all. I haven't actually tried hosting one myself, but I feel like this might be a cool way of trying to get the feedback. Let's see if this works. And I'll share my screen just so that you can see the live results as they come in. but I just posted in the chat a word cloud. I don't know if you can only put in like 1 or 2 word phrases. So try to avoid like a 10-word description of an issue. But if you have like certain words like app registration as a phrase, for example, I want to see if this is going to show up. If anyone is able to work with that. And if not, let me know. Federated credentials. Okay, we got a response. So yeah, let's use that to kind of input. So while I'm talking about some stuff, feel free to put in your responses here. And by the way, you can put in more than one, I believe. So you can put in like 50 if you just are like federated credentials, this thing, that thing, app registration, application registration, so on and so forth. And while you guys are all working on that, hopefully you can multitask. I forgot if we mentioned this before, but I would highly recommend that you can go ahead and, if anyone is available in April, in the Seattle area, there's going to be this PowerShell and DevOps Summit. This summit is going to be April 7th through the 10th. It's going to be a summit that actually myself, Mark, and a lot of the IAC team at Azure is going to be actively involved in. So we are going to have folks from the Terraform side, the Bicep side at this. If you're in the greater Seattle area, and even if you're not, I would consider seeing if you can make it out. Now, granted, these things are never that cheap, but if you're trying to figure out some budget or get some appeals, I would say I want to put this on your radar earlier rather than later so that you're aware. And we have a few sessions that I need to submit some abstracts to Mark too about Terraform, about we have some other ones for Bicep. We have some CI/CD workshops. There's going to be a lot of goodness over here. And obviously, it would be awesome if we could get a bunch of the community here. We can maybe even grab some food together. That would just be a really neat way to spend the week. So mark your calendars. The website, as you can see, is PowerShellSummit.org. So give that a look if you think this is something that you can consider. So coming back here, seeing a lot of good stuff. Can I see it like this? Yeah, it looks like it. All right, looks like we have a bunch of different responses here. Feel free to keep filling that out until we run out of time for today. But I am going to try to take that as sort of feedback, as well as the chat from today. But just thinking it's a nice way to perhaps condense a lot of the feedback here. All right, I'm trying to see what we have left. There's this question about API calls being made in the backend when running a Terraform plan. Anyone know of a good tool for that? I know that we've heard requests about the provider sort of exposing APIs, but that I think is a different question. So
Just echoing what I said in chat. There's a handful of tools. I posted a link to one called Fiddler, which will basically man in the middle your traffic, and you'll be able to observe the API calls live as they go. But also, if you enable trace logging, the requests and responses do show up in the trace log. It's just super noisy, so there's a lot of digging to find what you're looking for when in that log.
awesome. Sorry, Caleb, I forced you to talk about that, but appreciate it. I just dropped a link for the PowerShell and DevOps Summit. So I'm going to give it another minute for people to sort of think, or if anyone has items. Otherwise, I'll use the last 10 minutes for myself. And that's not pressure. I'm totally okay giving them up if anyone has anything they want to talk about.
I've got a question I'd like to sort of suppose. I've not done a massive amount of digging on this, but within Bicep, there's like the concept of like, is it pre-flight? For like checking policies and things. One thing that we seem to be hitting quite frequently at the moment is plan's fine, and then someone's put in a skew that's blocked by policy. Something's picked something that is blocking that way. Is there anything out there, tooling wise, that anyone's found before I start writing long-winded custom scripts that could actually pick up that kind of stuff and do like a version of like a pre-flight?
So
our internal solution was to just duplicate what the policy is checking for in conditionals in the module. So the variable have a test conditional checking for those values, and we can control. And there's also, let me find the documentation link on it. And there's also stuff that you could do like at the resource level as well to check for those. But you're basically just rewriting your policy in your module at that point.
Yeah.
So
That's
it
a
would be
design
nice if we
pattern
could
for
just use
us.
if we could just use OPA with Azure.
I just want to chime in here. The AZ API provider supports pre-flight. It actually has the ability to do all your pre-flight goodness at Terraform plan stage. So if you enable the feature flag, and I dropped it in the chat, you should be able to get the pre-flight. Pre-flight will check policy restrictions, as you were mentioning. So
yeah,
when you run Terraform plan, even if you have stuff like, for example, let's say for whatever good reason you set a restriction on your name and it's actually a random string, you use like the Terraform random provider, we will actually be able to sort of throw in some dummy to check if that variable, if that's going to pass the pre-flight restrictions. In other words, there are ways that we attempt to approximate assessment of things to match naming patterns. That part, I would say, is a little bit more dangerous in terms of whether or not it will actually catch things as, or sorry, it'll lean towards catching or saying that there's more problems when in reality, maybe the way you built your engine is a little bit different in terms of your naming conventions. But in general, that pre-flight experience works very well for anything that's deterministic. If you have a variable and you have the TFRs, if you have the string, if you have any of that, anything that's known after apply can get a little hazy in pre-flight world, but that's the same with Bicep. So I would highly recommend, if you really need pre-flight, see what you can do to try to utilize more of AZ API because that has it integrated.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Love it.
So another thing, I mean, we purposely design our modules so that they act as a lane. So we basically refer to it as the policies are your guardrails and our modules are the lane assist. So basically, if you use our modules, you will be compliant with the policies. And so we do preconditions and variable restrictions and whatever else. And certain things are not configurable. And that's our design philosophy. And so what we actually then do, so we have a set of hardening guides that we then maintain. And in our hardening guides, we actually say for this policy, what is the coverage in Terraform modules, right? In our inner source modules, is it full? Is it partial? And so basically we try to basically make those modules be intelligent of the policy on purpose.
And that's similar to what drove our decision to do the same kind of solution with precondition, post-conduct, and variable validation. And the idea, like the core goal, is to surface the error message as early in the deployment process as possible, and that's kind of where we found it.
Yeah, and same thing with preconditions, right? We're using a lot of preconditions because that happens early in the process, right? You don't have to wait till the plan to actually run. It'll stop you right at the beginning, which is really nice.
Yeah, so doing it that way is one way that considered. It's just like I say with something like VM SKUs, when you've got hundreds of the little beggars. That's going to be an awfully long list to try and check against. And then maintain as new ones come in and everything else. I was just curious if there was anything that could kind of look at policy and go, oh yeah, hang on, no, you're going to hit this.
We've written
Anyone has
PowerShell
found.
scripts, so we've written PowerShell scripts which pull those things. So for example, app service runtimes, right? Those change on occasion. So we have PowerShell scripts which pull what the things are, and then basically we'll generate the changes to try to create. It's there's still some human intervention, but we try to make it that it's more of a quick review. You know, run it, review it. Yep, that makes sense. Let's push it out, type of thing.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, and you can do a precondition.
Our policies aren't defined as code at the moment. I'm trying to get them, but
you can do a precondition in a data call and then compare it to a variable, as an example.
Yeah.
It's like you can, if you have a JSON hosted somewhere that you can access, you can do an HTTP data call, check that, and then compare it.
Yeah.
You don't have
I
to
think
do
I
that
heard
in
you say that you're
precondition
working
anymore.
on policy as code, and I would definitely say that
it's something that we were
look at
trying to
EPAC.
move towards, so.
Yeah, Microsoft. If you're a large organization, I don't know the size of your organization, but there's a tooling called EPAC, Enterprise Policy Management Policy as Code, that Microsoft has produced, and it makes doing PAC, policy as code, at scale.
Looks like we lost Sean in the middle, but I'm familiar with EPAC, and I echo his sentiment. I would say definitely check out EPAC as a great way to try to figure some of this out. Caleb beat me to it, though.
Cheers, guys. Very much appreciated.
Thanks, Cave. Thanks, Cave. So yeah, Caleb dropped the GitHub. I dropped the GitHub. Policy is a top of mind for us because we're trying to figure out some of those pain points for people. So, anyone have anything else?
I was going to ask Sean if he had a PowerShell to drop like a list of images, because that's one thing I struggle with sometimes is just keeping up with the amount of images and provider and publishers and SKUs and offers. And if I could write something up, or if somebody has it, to just dump those on a periodic basis, so that way
My solution is to have a server team that maintains that for you, and then tell everyone that they can only use the internal image library.
Oh, I get what you're saying. Yep.
Back for the win.
Yeah, and sorry, I'm in the car, but I don't have anything readily available. But you know, it's I have in the past dumped that type of stuff, so it is definitely possible to set something up.
Just to repeat what Dustin said, yes, Packer can definitely help you out in this scenario. Anybody else?
In scenarios like that, is there any plan in the future for Azure RM or Azure AZ API to do data calls for those types of things, so you could reference and filter?
Data calls to reference and filter specifically like
SKUs, SKUs, other things, because we've got data calls for all sorts of stuff, and I know you can do Azure CLI stuff, but the idea would be if you could do a data block for SKUs, then you could just reference the SKU from that, and it would be doing live active data calls.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm trying to fiddle around with I have here I'm just seeing what our VS Code extension does today if I try to fill in the SKU. So just a little hat trick here. If I'm in AZ API and I want to create a VM and I want to check a VM size, if I have the VS Code extension installed for AZ API, I can control space here. I'm pretty sure it's command space for Mac users, and it'll just give me this list, and I can work my way through it. Is that what you're looking for here, or am I missing the mark here?
Yeah, but that just lets you scroll through and choose one. I think he's looking for like, can I create a condition block on a variable that has the list of what I support and pre-populates it?
Gotcha.
Yeah. Because we lock stuff down to just particular sort of sub SKUs, and the need exception for like E-series because they're a bit steep. So yeah, it's trying to do something that's minimal touch. Ideally, was what I was wanting, because otherwise managing images, managing that kind of stuff, it's new stuff all the time, and it's just end up being a very boring full-time job for somebody.
Yeah. That makes sense. Okay. Thanks for clarifying. All right, we have a minute left. Anyone have any other thoughts there? All right. This has been a great call. Really enjoyed having everyone. Thanks for all the engagement. We hopped everywhere from app gateways to SKUs and images to policy and, of course, Entra. So we are really grateful from the product side that we have such a great community, that you guys are so willing to come in here every month and engage. Look forward to seeing everyone next month. I think based off of the scheduling of how these recur, it should be the 20th, if I'm not mistaken. And that will be after President's Day. So we'll see you all then. Have a great rest of your January and early February.